Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight: Rubio meets Wang Yi as trade tensions deepen, and U.S. threatens Canada with 35% tariff rate. More coming up on AWANI International. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi earlier today at the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit. The talks come as U.S. President Donald Trump pushes ahead with new tariffs, with China warning Washington against reinstating steep levies on its goods next month. Following the meeting, Rubio said the odds for a summit between Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping were high. He described talks with Wang Yi as constructive and positive, but admitted that there were still issues the two countries disagreed on. It was their first in-person meeting since Rubio took his current post in January. Their meeting took place less than 24 hours after Rubio sat down with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to discuss peace negotiations in Ukraine. He also held meetings with other counterparts from Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, and Malaysia. His visit comes amid renewed concerns over U.S. tariffs, which now include new levies on 8 Southeast Asian nations. Rubio yesterday stressed that ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific is a focal point of U.S. foreign policy and that it has no intention of abandoning its ASEAN partners. Now on to another top story. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened a 35% tariff on Canadian imports starting August 1st. The new rate is an increase from his first assigned 25%, warning that it would go up if Canada retaliated. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, in response, pledged to defend Canadian workers and businesses during trade talks with Washington. In Trump's letter, he said the new duty would be separate from existing sector-specific levies. Currently, Canadian goods face a 25% tariff imposed earlier this year over alleged fentanyl trafficking, along with 50% tariffs on steel and aluminium, 25% on autos, and a 50% levy on copper shipments beginning August 1st. It also remained unclear whether the new 35% tariff would also apply to goods covered under the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. Separately, Trump also raised the prospect of increasing levies on most other countries to 15% to 20% from a current blanket rate of 10%. We have more on the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit after the break. Stay tuned.
Check to clear. This is Gakpo. Great turn! That's how you respond!
Nak gandakan potensi perniagaan anda? Boleh dengan Biz One Rewards. Pelbagai sokongan pemasaran. Seperti Sports Watch Party, Food Review,
memang sedap.
Promosi di TV dan radio. Ubah potensi perniagaan anda sekarang.
Welcome back. The 58th ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting and its related meetings wrapped up today in Kuala Lumpur. Participants included ASEAN member states with observer Timor-Leste and dialogue partners such as the UK and Australia. Australia in particular has reiterated its call for a balanced approach in the region. Astro AWANI correspondent Faye Kwan shares more developments from the ground earlier today.
I'm here at the Kuala Lumpur Convention Centre for the final day of the 58th ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting, and it's a day packed with several high-level meetings and regional dialogues taking place. Now, among the key participants here is, of course, Australia, ASEAN's very first dialogue partner, and earlier today, Australian Foreign Minister Senator Penny Wong did meet with Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim to mark Australia's 70th year of diplomatic presence in Malaysia. And in a presser earlier, she also reaffirmed the country's commitment to regional cooperation as well as balance of power, and briefly commented on Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's upcoming visit to China.
We want to see a region where no one country dominates and no country is dominated. We want to see a region where sovereignty is protected. We want to see a region where there is a balance of power, where there is strategic stability, where countries can make their own choices, and where we do not see coercion or duress. That is Australia's position, and we will keep working with countries of the region and beyond to assure that. I said in my speech yesterday morning, continued US engagement in this region is critical to strategic stability. We believe that, and we continue to work not just with the US but with ASEAN to assure that, and also with the countries of North Asia, including the Republic of Korea and Japan. Well, the Prime Minister is proceeding to China for the next annual leaders meeting. That is obviously part of our architecture of our diplomatic relationship with China. We have made clear we want a stable relationship with China. We know there are areas where we can cooperate. We know and we will. We know there are areas where we will disagree, and we have and we will. But we also know that dialogue and engagement is in all our interests, because that enables us to navigate better the relationship. Thank you very much.
Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and U.S. President Donald Trump are set to hold their first bilateral meeting in Washington in the coming days. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirms this after talks with his Philippine and Japanese counterparts at the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting earlier today.
Manila said remains committed to negotiating a lower tariff rate after Trump raised it to 20% this week, up from the 17% threatened in April. Philippine trade officials are also expected to travel to Washington next week to pursue a deal. The U.S. goods trade deficit with the Philippines grew to $4.9 billion in 2024, a 21.8% jump from the year before. Despite trade tensions, U.S.-Philippines relations remain strong under Marcos, who has deepened ties and expanded U.S. military access to Philippine bases.
Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says that Brazil will enter talks with the U.S. but is ready to impose reciprocal countermeasures if needed. He warns that if negotiations fail, Brazil will legally slap a 50% tariff on U.S. exports.
This came after U.S. President Donald Trump in a letter on Wednesday announced a 50% tariff on Brazilian goods. Lula said Brazil will both negotiate and file a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization against the move. In his letter, Trump accused Lula of politically persecuting former President Jair Bolsonaro and demanded the prosecution be dropped. Bolsonaro, who lost the 2022 election, is under investigation for allegedly plotting a military coup to overturn the results.
U.S. President Donald Trump has nominated Nick Adams as the U.S. ambassador to Malaysia. He will replace Edgar Kagan, a career diplomat who was nominated to the position by the then President Joe Biden in May 2023.
Adams, an Australian-born naturalized American conservative political commentator, has long been a supporter of Trump. He had actively campaigned for him in the 2024 presidential election. In a post on Truth Social congratulating Adams, Trump described him as an incredible patriot who champions the virtues of American greatness. Adams' nomination comes just after the Trump administration sent Malaysia a letter informing the latter that it would be hit by a 25% tariff starting August 1st.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he has struck a deal to supply Ukraine with weapons via NATO, with the latter fully paying for them. This marked the first time Trump sends weapons to Kiev under presidential power, frequently used by his predecessor.
The Presidential Drawdown Authority allows the president to tap into U.S. weapons stockpiles to help allies in times of emergency. Sources told Reuters that Trump's team plans to send around $300 million in arms, possibly including defensive Patriot missiles and medium-range rockets. Until now, the Trump administration had only shipped weapons previously approved by former President Joe Biden, with the last military aid from the stockpile worth $500 million approved by Biden on January 9th. But Trump has grown increasingly impatient over the lack of progress in ending the war in Ukraine, often expressing frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He also hinted that a major announcement related to the conflict is coming soon.
The Small and Medium Enterprises Association Malaysia has cautioned that the United States' 25% tariff on Malaysian exports could have a devastating impact on small businesses. Here to explain the implications is Samantha's National President, Datuk William Ng.
I think the impact on SMEs, especially those who are export-oriented, will be quite serious given this new tariff. We must remember that the US is our third largest trading partner, so a 25% tariff, to us is the equivalent of an economic earthquake, especially for businesses that depend on the US as the final destination. We must also remember that many of our SMEs already operate on a very thin margin, and this tariff will almost immediately render our goods less competitive vis-a-vis countries with lower tariffs, such as, of course, Vietnam. But then our concern is not just export. We're also worried about jobs. We're worried about production capacity. We're also worried about investor confidence moving forward in Malaysia as a investment destination. I think as exports slow down, we'll also see ripple effect across our domestic economy. I think this is quite important, especially in services like logistics, hospitality and retail. So it's not just the exporters and the manufacturers that will be impacted. The whole economy will be impacted in one way or another. There are some people who are already saying, don't worry, because tariff will hurt US consumers more than us, because ultimately they are the one who absorb it. But this is not a zero-sum game. If the US consumers are hit, business confidence and of course consumption across the world will also be impacted.
William also called on the government to fast-track support for SMEs to help them build resilience against future economic shocks.
I think what has been announced earlier in April, right after the first announcement, things like SJPP, things like soft loan, things like getting money for trade to help SMEs to pivot to other market. I think all these are useful. And in fact, these were drawn with in consultation industry. So obviously, we are supportive of it, and it should go on. But we should disperse them as soon as possible to help the SMEs overcome this issue. But I think what is equally important is that this support shouldn't be limited to exporters alone, because as I've said earlier, the issue here is not just exporters. Domestic SMEs will also face second-order impacts from the weaker demand of our products. So we are urging the government, if possible at all, to pause any planned cost increment, including, of course, the planned petrol subsidy rationalization, until at least the situation stabilizes and we know what kind of damage or how much damage is done and whether or not then we can absorb it. I think what we want is also to recommend incentives to basically boost local demand. For example, you give more rebate, you have a more Buy Malaysian products campaign and so on to support our economy and the domestic players. I think the longer term, grants for automation and digitalization, I think obviously will help our SMEs to be resilient. And I think this, regardless of the impact of tariff, we will need to make sure that our SMEs are ready for any future eventuality.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more, and be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.